In the summer of 2010, I bought the biggest telescope I could afford, the smallest Dobsonian ever made, the Orion SkyQuest XT 4.5. There was no computer control, no tracking, you just move it around and look through it. That first summer, I saw Saturn, Jupiter, the Andromeda Galaxy, all for the first time. While I do love visual astronomy, it's a completely different experience than astrophotography. Visual astronomy is all about the in-the-moment experience, whereas astrophotography is all about documenting and revealing the object in incredible detail. Astrophotography lets you share the experience in an incredible way. My astrophotography addiction started when I placed my point-and-shoot digital camera up to the eyepiece of my manual telescope. I pointed my telescope at one of the brightest deep sky objects in the sky and pressed the shutter button. In a 15-second exposure, I could see a faint purple glow from the Orion Nebula, and I knew I was hooked. It was out of focus, noisy, and a whopping 2 megapixels in size, and I was thrilled. There is nothing like taking your first deep sky image. You're taking pictures of objects that lie thousands or millions of light years away, galaxies, nebulae, star-forming regions. They're actually out there, and there's an endless, lifetime supply of new targets to capture. The best part about it is you can see way more in an image than you ever could with your eye. Even if visual astronomy is your thing, how can you not enjoy seeing the object in incredible detail, especially when you've captured it yourself? For this reason, I think you should try astrophotography, and it's not as hard as you think. The process of capturing a deep sky object forces you to invest some serious time into the object. As you frame it up with your camera and telescope, it becomes more real in the sky, like as if it were waiting for you to find it. You collect your images, you reveal more and more detail, and you can't help but become even more fascinated in what you're looking at. Of course, the capturing stage is just one part of the process. As your camera collects light on the galaxy for several minutes, what was once a faint ball of light turns into a swirling mass with detailed spiral arms. After a few hours worth of exposure time, you can combine the data into something even more detailed. When you feel like you've collected enough photons, you get to review the pictures you've taken and decide which ones will be included in your master image. A combination or stack of all the best image frames into one glorious master file. This is where you get to put your own artistic spin on the photo and dig out the subtle details. Image stacking is one of the key concepts of astrophotography. Whether it's a wide-angle picture of the Milky Way or a close-up of the Andromeda Galaxy, image stacking reduces camera noise and increases signal or light. In short, take as many images of your subject as you can and use one of the many great image stacking tools to combine them all together. All astrophotos start out with humble beginnings, but by stretching the data, you can see what's really in there. How far you want to take it is up to you. Okay, now comes the fun part. Choosing your equipment and building a deep sky astrophotography rig to capture the types of targets that interest you most. Unfortunately, there's no one-size-fits-all option in the telescope world, so narrowing down your interests is a good idea. While I'm going to focus on the middle option, deep sky astrophotography, a lot of the same information applies to wide-angle nightscapes and Milky Way photography. What all of these setups have in common is the tracking, and this key feature is what allows astrophotographers to freeze galaxies and nebulae in place and take incredibly detailed portraits in a sky that moves. If you're serious about getting into astrophotography, you're going to need a capable camera. While it's possible to take some pretty cool shots with a smartphone, you're going to want to get a DSLR or mirrorless camera. I'm just going to call both types DSLRs moving forward. A DSLR is an interchangeable lens camera body with the ability to control every camera setting. Aperture, ISO, exposure, all of these settings can affect the amount of light your camera sensor collects. And this is really important for astrophotography. A lot of the automatic features cameras have were designed for regular daytime photography, so tapping into the custom settings can help you take better pictures at night. As an example, you can set the camera to take a 30-second exposure of a starry sky using a low f-stop and record more starlight than your eyes could ever see. I started with an entry-level Canon Rebel DSLR and used a wide-angle lens. It was a great entry point into the hobby. This was the camera that made me fall in love with collecting light in the dark, And once I realized how much light was up there, I couldn't stop. You can use your DSLR camera with lenses or a telescope. Lenses are great for creative shots like nightscapes and wide areas of the night sky, while telescopes are best at when you really want to pull those targets in for a closer look. Attaching a camera to a telescope is a simple process. You just need a T-ring adapter to thread the camera onto the telescope focuser and make sure that the spacing is correct. While a DSLR is a great all-purpose astrophotography camera, a lot of people eventually make the leap to a dedicated astronomy camera. These cameras look like a metal cylinder with vents on the side. Inside, you'll find a CMOS camera sensor like the ones used in a DSLR, except these ones are modified for astro imaging and cooled. The cooling is important for long exposure images with less noise, and the modification to the sensor allows for more of the reds found in many nebulae to be recorded. The catch is they're a little trickier to control, at least at first. Unlike a DSLR, there's nothing to actually control the camera on the body itself, just a humming, featureless red can. They require dedicated software and hardware to run, so you'll need to run an application on your laptop computer, mini PC, or Wi-Fi controller via a tablet or smartphone. These tools give you a lot more control, but they also add complexity to your overall setup. I always recommend that people start with DSLRs before stepping up to an astronomy camera. You can also get an Astro modified version of a DSLR camera too. There are a number of third-party services that will do this for you. A lot of people get hung up on this Astro modification thing, and I always tell them the same thing. You don't need an Astro modified camera to enjoy astrophotography, but when you get to a point that you feel like you need it, you'll know. Certain projects, especially emission nebulae, can really benefit from it. By far, the most common question I get is, which telescope should I buy? And I've had the same answer for almost a decade: a wide field apochromatic refractor. I'll explain why. The telescope you choose for your first astrophotography rig will have a major impact on your progress early on. Some telescope types make the process a little harder than it should be simply due to their design. There are three main specs you need to keep in mind when looking for your next telescope: aperture, focal ratio, and focal length. As an example, one of my favorite beginner astrophotography telescopes, the William Optics RedCat 51, has an aperture of 51 millimeters, a focal length of 250 millimeters, and a focal ratio of f4.9. Focal length refers to the overall magnification of the scope. It's the same way we measure camera lenses. 250 millimeters is considered wide or a short focal length, whereas 1,000 millimeters or more is considered narrow or a long focal length. The focal ratio, or f-stop, is its light gathering ability. The lower the number, the better. An f4 telescope is considered fast, an f10 is considered slow. Keeping these traits in mind for your first setup can save a lot of frustration. An SCT, or Schmidt-Cassegrain telescope, is a popular choice. But this slow telescope will make finding your target and focusing your camera much more difficult. Combine this with an ultra-long focal length of 2,000 millimeters and you have the perfect recipe for getting lost in space. I recommend starting out with something substantially smaller. A compact refractor telescope like the RedCat 51 or similar will make many aspects of the astrophotography experience a little easier. While a Newtonian reflector is a good choice, they can be tricky to balance and align optically and are substantially larger than a compact refractor. An apochromatic refractor is best, either a triplet or Petzval lens design. This design is better suited for color correction, which is really important for astro imaging. There are a lot of great options in this category, from 50 millimeters in diameter all the way up to 185. A common misconception is that a large telescope with a high magnification is needed to take great astrophotos. But for deep sky imaging of galaxies and nebulae, a little apo is one of the best options. These are what I use on all of my dark sky trips to capture large nebulae regions in the night sky. Now let's talk about the most important piece of gear you will be using for deep sky astrophotography: your tracking mount. Because the sky appears to move throughout the night from our vantage point on Earth, we need to offset this motion to take a clear picture. Even a relatively short exposure of 5 seconds will show star trailing through a telescope. As the focal length increases, this time gets even shorter. To avoid rotation in the image, astrophotographers use an equatorial telescope mount that is aligned with the celestial pole. The telescope mount is designed to align its center axis with the celestial pole and spin at the same speed the Earth is spinning at. This is actually quite a simple process, in the northern hemisphere at least. But getting the telescope mount polar aligned and tracking smoothly is a common challenge for many people starting out. It's one of those things that gets easier over time, so don't get discouraged. There are a few important specs of a telescope mount to keep in mind. One is the maximum payload capacity of the mount itself, how much camera and telescope gear it can hold. It could be anywhere from 11 pounds to 150, depending on how robust the mount is. The smallest, most portable tracking mounts, often called star trackers, are a fantastic option for those who travel. Heavy, observatory-grade telescope mounts can weigh up to 100 pounds and are not designed to be set up and torn down on a whim. Modern-day astrophotography mounts, including star trackers, now have built-in computer databases that can find, point to, and track objects for you. We're pretty spoiled. They can be controlled from a small hand controller that plugs into the mount or from your laptop computer or smartphone. Strainwave and harmonic drive mounts have now entered the scene, and unlike a traditional equatorial mount, they don't require perfect balance to operate efficiently. For small to medium-sized loads, they don't even require a counterweight, which is a huge bonus for travel setups. The ZWO AM5 and even smaller AM3 are extremely popular because they can hold a full-size astrophotography setup, yet are the size of a compact star tracker. If you're getting into the game now, I'd seriously consider picking up one of these in place of a traditional full-size equatorial telescope mount. While the camera, telescope, and mount are the three most important elements of a deep sky astrophotography setup, there are some key accessories needed to run the equipment. Some key items include a camera controller or computer software to automate your imaging session, a guide scope and guide camera for auto guiding, filters, and dew heater bands to keep your optics free of moisture throughout the night. While it's possible to take your pictures of a deep sky object by pressing the shutter button on your DSLR for each shot, you will quickly realize that standing next to your camera all night isn't very fun. A better option is to use a device that automatically fires the pictures off in a sequence. There are lots of tools that can help with this, from a remote shutter release cable or intervalometer to computer software with advanced controls. You can connect your camera and mount to a laptop computer to run whichever software you want. Some popular choices include SharpCap, Nina, and Astrophotography Tool. All of these tools have advanced camera control settings, from adjusting the temperature of the sensor to leveraging star catalogs to help your telescope find objects. You'll need to make sure that you have all of the necessary software installed on the machine to run the equipment. This includes everything from the camera control software itself to the latest drivers for your camera and mount. You'll also want to make sure your computer is protected from the elements. A plastic bin on its side works great. All of your gear and accessories will need to be plugged into the computer's USB ports, so you'll want to keep that as organized as possible to avoid anything catching throughout the night. If this sounds like a lot of headaches, I have the perfect option for you coming up. The ASI Air has made my life so much easier, and I feel compelled to tell you about how great it is. I have not used my laptop computer for a night of astrophotography since first using the ASI Air Pro in 2020. It's a mini Wi-Fi controlled camera controller that is accessed through a dedicated app on your smartphone. The tiny device is mounted to your telescope, so all cables can run neatly into it. The app does everything from pointing your telescope to running detailed imaging plans involving multiple targets. It's really not fair how easy this device has made the entire astrophotography experience. The one downfall of the ASI Air is that it was developed by a company called ZWO, and it's only compatible with their ASI dedicated astronomy cameras and most DSLRs. Fortunately, ZWO makes some of the most widely used and reliable astronomy cameras on the market. If you're looking for this type of experience with a mini PC and software, riding along with your telescope and controlling it from inside the house, there are other options out there. The ZWO package though, the ASI Air, probably has the slickest user interface and is the most user-friendly. Filters are another key part of astrophotography, and learning which ones are best for specific scenarios is essential. Filters come in varying levels of light pollution filtration, from mild broadband filters to strong narrowband filters that only allow a very narrow wavelength of light to pass through to the sensor. They both have their place, but in general, filters are necessary from the city and are often not used at all from a dark sky location. While light pollution filters can help reduce a lot of the unwanted glow from the city in your images, they also dull out the subtle natural colors of the stars and potentially your object. From a light polluted area, I recommend a dual band filter like the Optolong L Extreme for emission nebulae and supernova remnants. For broadband targets like star clusters, galaxies, and reflection nebulae, you'll want to use something more mild like the Optolong L Pro. Astrophotographers usually list the filters used for a particular project, which is one of the best ways to decide which one you should use for your intended target. Up to this point, I've been referring to astrophotography with a color camera like a DSLR or a one-shot color astronomy camera. Narrowband and LRGB imaging through separate filters with a monochrome camera is a bit more advanced, but it's the next step forward when you're ready to take even better images. The main idea is that you can collect a much stronger signal in each shot, but to build a complete color image, you need to capture images through each color filter individually. All of your deep sky projects will involve taking many images of your target. For example, a typical deep sky project will include 3 hours or much more of total exposure time. Rather than a single 3-hour exposure, which would not be pretty, the image is built up over time using shorter exposures. For example, 60 times 3 minutes. The image stacking process is a key part of astrophotography and how we're able to capture images with incredible detail. Not only does the stacking process increase the amount of overall light collected, but it reduces the things we don't want, like noise too. This is known as the signal-to-noise ratio. The difference between a single 3-minute exposure and a stack of 60 exposures is dramatic. For those willing to put the time in, it's not uncommon for a project to reach 20 hours of total exposure time. In general, the more time you put into your image, the better. It will be more enjoyable to process and your results will be better too. As with most things in life, a little planning and preparation can go a long way. You'll have plenty of cloudy nights to research new equipment, decide on your next project, and look for example images of the object you have in mind. Stellarium is one of my favorite tools to use when planning my next astrophotography session. You can import a custom landscape, such as your backyard, to see exactly where a particular deep sky object will be in the sky from your vantage point. You can see important things like where the moon will be and what phase it's in, as well as meteor showers, ISS passes, and much more. Every single one of my astrophotography projects starts in Stellarium, and I highly recommend both the desktop and mobile versions. You can increase your chances of success by choosing an appropriate target for your setup. You'll want it to be an object that's a good fit for your telescope in terms of size and resolution, and that it's possible to get a good image from your imaging location. Certain targets will need dark skies and a moonless night to do justice. Galaxies, reflection nebulae, and dark nebulae are in this category. Other targets, like emission nebulae, can be captured from almost anywhere, even during a full moon with the right filter. The art of processing an astrophoto is an involved, lengthy process. You may enjoy this element of astrophotography even more than the image capture stages. Running your camera and telescope is the outside portion, image processing is the inside portion. Because you don't really get a good look at the images you take outside in the moment, it can be really exciting to finally review your images on the computer the next morning. You can simplify the image processing side of things into 2 stages: image stacking and image processing. The stacking and calibration of the images are all done at the same time using one of the many great, often free image stacking tools like Deep Sky Stacker or Cirrel. While it seems like a lot of extra work, these extra steps can make or break your final image. After a little practice, these steps will become second nature. It's usually a shock to beginners to find out just how much stretching is done to a deep sky astrophoto. The unstretched or linear data is actually very dim. It looks nothing like the images of galaxies and nebulae you see online. Some objects do pack a punch straight out of the camera. The Orion Nebula comes to mind. Most other objects, however, will need their brightness brought way up to fully enjoy them. It's not just the brightness of the object that needs a boost either. A healthy amount of saturation, or the intensity of its colors, and sharpening are key steps to an image processing routine. If you're looking for some help here, I have a complete image processing guide, and you'll find that in the description. There are more tools than ever for processing astrophotos. Most astrophotographers will bounce around between 1 or 2 tools depending on what they want to do to the image. Some are powerful but difficult to learn. Others are user-friendly but limited in astrophotography specific functions. Some are completely free, while others require a subscription. If you have dabbled in photography or graphic design, you've likely already crossed paths with Adobe Photoshop, and this is a fantastic tool for deep sky astrophotography. If you're ready to invest some serious time into learning the most powerful astro processing tool on the market, PixInsight is your best bet. Serial is a refreshing balance between both tools that is completely free. No matter which one you choose, YouTube is your best friend. Whichever stage of the process you're at, you will find helpful tutorial videos to walk you through the process. While written material is nice, it can quickly become outdated as the software introduces new features throughout the year. Some of my favorite astrophotography image processing tutorials are by Luca Matico, Polyman Astro, and Nico Carver of Nebula Photos. The nature of astrophotography means that you'll be chasing moving targets in the sky before they're gone. And when you're getting started, there is a sense of urgency to get everything working quickly. A surefire way to get really frustrated with astrophotography is to expect everything to work on the first try. Expect to fail for a while and celebrate the small victories of learning what not to do as they happen. For the control freak, triple checker, did your homework for months crowd, this hobby will humble you. And the challenge is what makes it so special. If it were easy, everyone would do it. But the average person never does. But us, we're different. And I think that's worth celebrating. I think it's worth going on ridiculously long trips to dark sky locations, going to star parties and feeling connected to someone you just met. Because at the end of the day, we're just all a bunch of nerds geeking out about space. Clear skies, everybody.